What do you mean 3 trucks down and no backup drivers? Nolan Kray leaned back in his leather chair, phone pressed to his ear, staring out the window of his downtown office. It was a Monday morning, and the complaints had started piling up before sunrise. Late deliveries, damaged packages, a missed drop that cost a client a full-day operation. This wasn't just about one bad day, this was the 3rd week in a row. Something had gone wrong at Store 5, one of the 8 delivery hubs in his father's old logistics company. Nolan had inherited the business 3 years ago. Once a hands-on warehouse worker, he now found himself buried in spreadsheets and boardroom meetings. He'd heard excuses for weeks. Driver quit last minute. Truck maintenance issue. Customer gave us the wrong info. But numbers didn't lie. Store 5's performance was free-falling, and it had the highest turnover. Something wasn't right. He rubbed his jaw, his voice low. "All right, I'll handle it myself." There was a pause on the line. "You mean like, go there?" asked Jenna, his executive assistant. "Yeah, I'm going undercover. But they've never met you in person, right?" "Never." He stood and walked to the mirror. "It's a chain operation. I was always too busy with the top-level stuff when we opened Store 5. I've only met the district manager once." He stared at his reflection. "If I cut the beard, grow a little stubble, get a warehouse uniform, and wear a cap, no one's recognizing me," Jenna sighed. "You sure about this? I need to see what's really going on." By Wednesday, Nolan was standing behind the warehouse at Store 5, dressed in gray cargo pants, steel toe boots, and a faded blue company cap. A name tag read, Rick. His hands were calloused from last night's box. Lifting at Store 2, he'd trained there quietly to make sure he looked the part. He spotted a tall, wiry man shouting across the lot. "Hurry up, we got 6 stops and no time for breaks." That had to be the manager. Nolan approached, pushing a dolly. "Hey, I'm Rick," he said. "New temp. Supposed to ride along today." The man squinted, annoyed. Yeah, corporate keeps sending us temps. Can you drive?" "Yeah, but I'm fine riding." "Good, I'm Mason. You'll ride with Darnell. Truck 12. Don't slow him down." Nolan found Darnell by the truck, a big guy, early 40s, calm eyes. He gave Nolan a once-over and nodded. "You ever done delivery before?" "A little." Darnell smiled. "All right, just keep your eyes open." Mason's going to be breathing down our necks all day. They hit the road by 8:15 a.m. The first hour was smooth. Darnell was focused, respectful to customers, and careful with every package. Nolan noticed him double-checking labels, lifting with his knees, helping an elderly man push a dolly up a ramp. This was the kind of employee he wanted more of. But after their 3rd stop, Mason's voice came through the truck's radio. "You 2 are behind. I don't care how cut the checks. Skip the signatures. Just get it done." Darnell frowned. "That's not how we're trained." "He says that a lot?" Nolan asked. "Every day. Wants us to skip safety to make time. Last week a guy fell off a dock trying to save 2 minutes. Nolan's stomach turned. "What happened?" "Sprained his back. Mason told him to walk it off or lose hours. Guy quit." The next delivery was to a small business. Packages weighed over 80 pounds. Darnell pulled out the lift gate, but Mason's voice barked again. "Don't use the lift. Takes too long. Just push it down the ramp." Darnell stared at the radio. "That's not safe." "We don't have time," Mason snapped, "unless you want to be replaced." Nolan stepped in. "We're not doing that." Darnell looked at him, surprised. "Seriously?" "Man," Nolan said, "that's a back injury waiting to happen." Darnell hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, you're right." They used the lift. It took an extra 3 minutes. Back in the truck, the radio crackled again. "You think you're special, Darnell? You think I won't report this? You'll be lucky to get a shift next week." Darnell shook his head, jaw tense. "This is every day. He talks like that all the time." Nolan kept quiet, but his fists clenched. There wasn't a single part of this that was okay. By Tuesday's p.m., they were rushing to the last stop when the brakes squealed at a light. Darnell grunted. "This truck needs servicing. I reported it last week." "Still not fixed?" "Nope. Mason said to make it stretch another month." It was all adding up. The shortages, the injuries, the turnover. Nolan had seen enough. That night, he called Jenna. Tomorrow, I'm doing a full ride again, but I want Mason in the truck with us. Won't he suspect something? He thinks I'm just another temp. He wants things fast. Let's see how far he's willing to go. Nolan stared at the cracked windshield of the truck. He wasn't just going to fix numbers anymore. He was going to fix the people breaking them. The next morning, Nolan arrived an hour earlier than call time, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in through the back lot. The air was humid, heavy with diesel fumes and the scent of cardboard. A few drivers stood around the loading dock, shoulders slumped, sipping burnt coffee from cracked thermoses. No one spoke. He found Darnell inside the break room, tying his boots. "You sure you want to do this today?" Darnell asked, glancing up. "Yeah," Nolan said. "Let's see how things really go when Mason's riding along." Darnell gave a shrug, but didn't say more. He looked tired, really tired, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, same uniform he'd worn yesterday, just more wrinkled. Mason eventually showed up 20 minutes late, stomping through the warehouse with a half-open energy drink and a clipboard he didn't seem to look at. He dropped the can on a desk and barked, "Truck 12, let's go. I don't care if it's not loaded yet. You can sort it on the road." Nolan followed him outside, saying nothing. Mason climbed into the passenger seat. "You new guy drive? Darnell, back." He didn't wait for a response. Nolan got behind the wheel. Darnell silently took the middle seat. The truck was more cramped with the 3 of them, and the inside smelled like stale fast food and heat-warped plastic. Mason flipped through his phone, then spoke without looking up. "All right, here's the deal. You don't stop for lunch, you don't ask questions, you don't call dispatch unless someone dies. Got it?" Neither of them answered. "I said, got it?" "Got it," Darnell said, voice flat. Nolan kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't going to play along for long. He just needed to see the limits. The first stop was a hardware distributor. The boxes were stacked sloppily in the back of the truck. Nothing was grouped by route. Some labels were upside down, and none of them matched the manifest. "Who loaded this?" Nolan asked. Mason scoffed. "Loaders are temps. They don't know anything. You figure it out." Nolan stepped out and started sorting manually. Darnell joined him without being asked. "You know we're going to waste half the day just finding stuff," Darnell said under his breath. Mason stayed in the cab with the air conditioning blasting. They finally made the delivery, but by the 3rd stop, the inefficiency became impossible to ignore. More than once, they had to climb over boxes to reach items buried in the back. Mason refused to help, arms crossed, muttering complaints about babysitting grown men. At the 5th stop, the delivery involved a narrow staircase. Mason leaned back in his seat. "Just throw it up there. Customer signs either way." Nolan turned. "You want us to toss a $200 monitor down a flight of stairs?" Mason didn't even blink. "I want you to move faster." Darnell didn't wait. He hoisted the box over his shoulder and started walking. Nolan followed. The customer, a middle-aged woman in business attire, opened the door and immediately frowned. "You guys were supposed to be here 2 hours ago." Darnell apologized, but Mason's voice rang out from the truck. "Tell her traffic was hell, or say nothing. Just get the signature." The woman looked toward the truck, eyebrows raised. "Is that your supervisor?" "No, ma'am," Nolan said quickly. "We're just here to make sure you get what you paid for." Back at the truck, Mason leaned out the window. "She give you attitude?" "She had every right to," Nolan said. Mason shook his head. "You're not going to last. You care too much." By noon, they were 4 stops behind. Mason demanded they skip the next one and circle back if they complained loud enough. Nolan refused. "We're not skipping stops," he said. "You're a temp," Mason snapped. "You don't make decisions." Nolan didn't respond. He just kept driving. Half an hour later, they reached a small grocery store where they were supposed to deliver 10 cases of dry goods. As they unloaded, Mason stepped out of the truck for the first time. The store's clerk, a short man in his 20s, greeted them with a clipboard. "Can I get someone to help bring these into the back?" Darnell said. "Sure, we'll help." Mason cut in. "Nope, curb drop only. You handle it." "We've always helped them unload," Darnell said. "Not anymore. Get back in the truck." The clerk looked confused. "But the last guy's always—" "I said no," Mason barked. "We're not your warehouse boys." The clerk stepped back, clearly rattled. Nolan locked eyes with Mason. This is a contract client, Nolan said. We're supposed to set their stock inside. You reading the contract now? Mason sneered. Do your job or don't come back. They left the 10 boxes stacked in the sun. Nolan watched the clerk struggle to drag the first one across the lot alone. Back in the truck, Nolan spoke quietly to Darnell. Is this normal? Darnell rubbed his hands together, avoiding eye contact. He's worse when he knows someone's watching. Nolan turned to Mason. How many good drivers have quit this year? Mason laughed. You have any idea how soft people are now? They want handouts for showing up. I don't have time to babysit. Maybe they don't want to be screamed at over nothing. They don't want to work. You think they're leaving because I'm loud? Please. The rest of the afternoon devolved into more chaos. One delivery was short by 3 items. The manifest didn't match what was in the truck. When Nolan suggested calling dispatch to clarify, Mason refused. Just blame the customer, he said. Say they signed for it. What if they didn't? They don't have proof. That was it. Nolan stopped the truck. We're not doing that. Mason leaned forward. Excuse me? We're not lying to customers. Then you can walk back. You first, Nolan said. There was a long silence. Darnell stared out the window, not moving. Mason's jaw twitched. You're fired, Mason said. Nolan pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and tapped record. Say that again. Mason's eyes narrowed. You think that scares me? No, Nolan said, but it'll be useful when I send it to corporate. I am corporate. No, Nolan said, standing outside the truck now. You're not. He pulled off the cap. I'm Nolan Kray, owner and CEO. Mason froze. Darnell turned slowly, his expression unreadable. You've been threatening employees, violating safety policy, and sabotaging client relationships, Nolan continued. You're done. Mason stepped out of the truck, suddenly pale. I didn't know. That's the point. You treat people like this when no one's watching. He turned to Darnell. You're not riding with him again. I'll have someone pick you up. Mason, hand over your keys. Now. Mason hesitated. Now, Nolan repeated, voice sharp. The keys clattered onto the pavement. As Mason walked stiffly across the lot, Nolan called Jenna. Have HR meet me at store 5 in an hour. We're starting over. He looked at Darnell, who still hadn't moved. You all right? Darnell nodded once, but his eyes were glassy. Didn't think I'd live to see someone actually do something about him. Well, Nolan said, you did. He knew this was only the beginning. There was more to fix systems, hiring, morale, but the rod at the top had just been cut out. And that was the first step worth taking. Nolan stood outside the warehouse doors, the afternoon heat pressing down like a weight. Mason's truck keys were now in his back pocket. The man himself had been escorted off the lot 10 minutes earlier, still fuming, but saying nothing more. Darnell leaned against the side of the truck, arms folded tightly across his chest, his shirt darkened with sweat. He hadn't spoken since they returned to the lot. Dispatch is sending another driver to pick up the rest of the route, Nolan said. Darnell nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't leave the ground. I meant what I said earlier, Nolan added. You're not riding with anyone like him again. Darnell straightened slightly. You get used to it. Not that you should, but you do. Nolan looked toward the open bay doors. Inside, 2 loaders were moving pallets without any coordination. A stack of boxes sat half-crushed near the entrance. No labels, no tape, just crumpled corners and dirt-streaked sides. You got time to walk me through what's happening in there? Nolan asked. Darnell looked surprised. You want me to show you the warehouse? I need someone who knows what's going on. You clearly do. Darnell hesitated, then nodded once and pushed away from the truck. Inside, the air was thick with dust and stale air. The overhead fan spun weakly, doing little more than shifting the heat around. A young guy with earbuds in was tossing a box onto a shelf without looking. It slipped and landed sideways, with a thud. That's Marcus, Darnell said quietly. He's okay. Just started last week. No one trained him. Nolan watched as Marcus picked the box back up and shoved it into place. Where's the warehouse supervisor? Nolan asked. Supposed to be Antonia. She's been calling out. I don't blame her. Why not? Darnell didn't answer immediately. He led Nolan through a back aisle, past a half-empty shelf with labels peeling off. She's been asking for more staff for months, said she couldn't keep tracking inventory and managing the line. Last month she got a write-up for leaving early. Truth is, she stayed an hour late every day the 2 weeks before that. You saw that? I was on closing shifts. She'd still be here when I clocked out. They turned a corner where a dented filing cabinet served as a desk. A single monitor sat on top, screen cracked, plugged into a blinking outlet that buzzed when the fan kicked on. Is this where she works? Darnell nodded. If you can call it that. Nolan crouched slightly, looking at the monitor. The login screen was frozen. Beneath the desk, a stack of paper manifests had spilled onto the floor, some torn, others marked with highlighter and pen. Why hasn't this been reported? It has. At least twice. Nothing changed. Nolan stood, jaw set. Who's been handling the routing? Darnell glanced toward the front of the warehouse. When Antonia's not here, Mason did it, or said he did. But honestly, I think he just guessed. Nolan walked back toward the loading dock. The two loaders were now arguing over a missing barcode scanner. One of them, a woman with a buzz cut and a limp, looked up as Nolan approached. You the new guy from yesterday? She asked. Sort of, Nolan said. What's your name? Marcy. Where's your scanner? Gone, again. We've got 4 that work between 8 of us. Mason locked the others in his office, said we'd break 'em. Why didn't you log a request for replacements? She gave a dry laugh. We did, 3 times. Doesn't matter. He said it wasn't in the budget. Nolan turned to the other loader, a wiry man with a sleeve tattoo and hollowed cheeks. What about you? Name's Vic. I've been here 6 months. I've asked for a pallet jack that doesn't drift. That one, he pointed to a jack leaning against the wall. Pulls left like a busted shopping cart. Nearly took my ankle out last week. Nolan walked over and tested the jack. It veered instantly when he moved it. This should have been pulled from use. Yeah, well, Mason said if we don't like it, we can carry stuff by hand. Nolan paused, then looked at both of them. Do you get breaks? Marcy shifted uncomfortably. Technically, but Mason used to call us over the intercom if we were gone more than 10 minutes. Said we were stealing time. You report that to HR? We tried. He caught wind of it. Next week, 3 of us lost hours. Nolan's voice was quiet. That ends today. Marcy's face remained blank, but her jaw unclenched slightly. Vic just nodded once. Nolan turned back to Darnell. How much ground does this crew cover? 3 zones? But they really need 5 people minimum. Right now, they're short 2. Who's scheduled this week? Roster's on Antonia's desk. They walked back to the cracked monitor. Nolan lifted the top page from the pile handwritten roster, scrawled in red ink. Half the shifts were empty. The rest were blocked with overlapping names. No wonder nothing's moving, Nolan muttered. He took out his phone and dialed Jenna. Yeah, he said after she picked up. I'm still here. I need you to pull payroll records for Store 5. Cross-check who's been clocking in against the posted schedule. And while you're at it, get me a list of terminated employees from the last 6 months. He ended the call and faced Darnell again. You think anyone else here would be willing to talk? Darnell looked toward the break room door. Maybe. Depends who. Let's find out. Inside, the break room was dim, lit only by a flickering overhead bulb and the glow from a vending machine that had "out of order" scrawled across it in permanent marker. 3 employees sat inside, eating in silence. One of them, an older man with calloused hands and a stitched name patch reading Eddie, looked up as they entered. You're the guy who stood down Mason, Eddie said. Name's Nolan, he replied. I run the company. The room went still. Eddie leaned forward slowly. You're joking. No. I came undercover to see what was going wrong. Now I know. A younger woman, no older than 20, set her sandwich down. Mason said corporate didn't care what happened out here. That's why I came. Eddie crossed his arms. You got more like him up there? He nodded at Darnell. I hope to, Nolan said. But first, I need to know what else I've missed. They talked for 20 minutes. Nolan listened, said little. He heard about broken equipment, shift swaps that never got approved, favoritism in scheduling, and new hires quitting after 3 days because no one showed them the basics. When he finally stood, he asked one last question. If I gave you what you needed, real support, working gear, enough staff, would you stay? Eddie didn't blink. If I saw you back here in a month, checking for yourself, yeah, I'd stay. Nolan nodded. Then I'll be back. As he stepped outside into the fading light, a dark sedan pulled into the lot. Jenna stepped out, holding a folder. I brought the records, she said, and you need to see this. He flipped it open. Inside were time cards, flagged red where clock-ins didn't align with scheduled hours. 27 discrepancies, she said, most of them under Mason's authority. Some employees were clocked out early in the system, others marked as no-show when they were present. Nolan's throat tightened, so he was shaving hours. And firing people who questioned it. He closed the folder. Get HR on the line. I want full restitution paid out. Anyone who left because of this gets a call and an apology. And Antonia, give her a choice. Come back as operations lead with a pay raise and training support, or take a severance with our thanks. She deserves both. Nolan looked across the lot. The truck he'd driven that morning sat idle now, but the people inside the building, those were the engines that really moved the company, and they'd been running on empty for far too long. Nolan stepped back into Store 5 the following Monday, this time through the front entrance. No cap, no borrowed uniform. Just a plain gray button-down and a clipboard tucked under his arm. The morning shift was gathering near the clock and kiosk, eyes darting toward him, unsure whether to speak or keep their heads down. He found Darnell by the lockers, tying a fresh pair of gloves tightly around his wrists. His posture was more upright. But the fatigue was still in his face. Too many weeks of overload couldn't be erased by one intervention. Morning, Nolan said. Darnell gave a quiet nod. Didn't think I'd see you again this fast. I don't make promises I don't plan to keep. Darnell glanced toward the warehouse floor. They said you fired Mason. I did. Then I owe you a thank you. No, Nolan said. You don't. That wasn't a favor. That was overdue. He turned toward the hallway leading to the office wing. Come with me. They entered the small corner office that had once been Mason's. The air still smelled faintly of stale cologne and burnt coffee. Jenna stood by the filing cabinet, placing a final folder into a locked drawer. A woman in a navy jacket stood beside her short, with streaks of silver in her tightly braided hair. She didn't speak as Nolan entered, but her gaze was direct. Darnell, Nolan said, this is Antonia. She extended her hand. I've heard your name more times than I can count. Good things, I hope, Darnell said as he shook it. Mostly that you stuck around when a lot of others walked. That counts. Nolan stepped between them. Antonia's back, officially, but not as a replacement. We're restructuring. She'll head warehouse operations. I've brought in a logistics coordinator to handle routing. No more loading chaos, no more guesswork. Antonia tilted her head slightly. And we're hiring, not posting and hoping. We've contracted a staffing agency to provide screened candidates. You'll have 4 new hands by end of week, maybe 6 by Monday. That's still not enough for full shift coverage, she said, arms crossed. It's not, but it's a start. I'm not asking you to carry the whole weight. I'm asking you to help balance it. She nodded once. Fair. Nolan turned to Darnell. You ever train new hires? Unofficially. A few times. You're doing it officially now. You'll get a bump in pay and a title to match, driver mentor. That means you train our new people, show them how we do things right. No shortcuts, no pressure to rush. Darnell blinked. You serious? Completely. Can I still drive? Absolutely, just with more purpose now. Antonia gave a small grin. You've got the kind of patience most of us burned out on years ago. Use it. Darnell let that sit for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. Nolan turned back to Jenna. Let's brief the floor. They stepped out as a group into the center of the warehouse. Nolan stood on a crate to address the workers gathering between the shelves, some loading, some scanning, some just arriving. I won't keep you long, he said, raising his voice just enough to cut through the ambient noise of forklifts and fans. You've all seen a lot of turnover. You've worked short, been yelled at, told not to question things that didn't make sense. That ends now. No one spoke, but no one walked away either. Going forward, this facility will run like every part of this company should, with structure, respect, and accountability. We're reviewing every write-up issued in the last 6 months. Any that were retaliatory or unsubstantiated will be removed. If you left because of how you were treated and you want to come back, you'll be welcomed without penalty." He paused. "Some of you don't trust that yet. I don't blame you, but I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for your eyes. Watch what changes. Judge that instead." A woman near the back raised her hand. "What about the trucks? We've got 2 that haven't had brakes looked at in months." Nolan pointed to Jenna. "We've brought in a third-party fleet inspector. Every truck gets checked this week. Anything unsafe is off the road until it's fixed. Period." Another worker, Vic, the loader with the sleeve tattoo, called out. "And the scanners?" 4 new ones arrived this morning, 6 more by Friday. No more sharing broken gear." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not disbelief, just cautious processing. Nolan scanned them all. "We're not rushing this. We're rebuilding. If you're willing to be part of that, we'll make sure your voice counts. If you're not, no hard feelings. But we won't go back to how it was." He stepped down. Nobody clapped. That wasn't the point. But no one walked away either. By midday, the first staffing agency rep arrived with 2 new hires. Antonia walked them through safety protocols personally. Darnell paired each with a seasoned driver, taking them through the truck layout, handheld scanners, and customer protocol patiently without cutting corners. Marcus, the young loader with the earbuds, approached Nolan near the loading bay. "Hey," he said, eyes shifting. "That stuff you said earlier about reviewing write-ups, does that include mine?" "What was it for?" "Clocking out 2 minutes late. I was finishing a load." Nolan signaled to Jenna. "Get his name. We'll flag it." Marcus gave a quiet thanks and walked off. He didn't smile, didn't linger. But his shoulders weren't as tight. In the afternoon, Antonia pulled Nolan aside. "You're going to need someone local to monitor this. You can't be everywhere." "I know. You want my recommendation?" "Go ahead." She pointed to Marcy, the loader with the limp. "She's sharp, knows the floor. People listen when she talks, even if they pretend not to. She want the responsibility? She'll take it if you ask her like it matters." Nolan nodded. He walked over to Marcy, who was taping up a freight pallet. "Got a minute?" he asked. She stood, wiping her hands on her cargo pants. "What's up? You know this place better than most. You've seen it at its worst. I want your help building it better." She raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a promotion?" "More like a role, floor lead. You set the pace, train new hires on warehouse protocol, flag safety issues directly to Antonia. You'll get time to do it right, and pay to match." She squinted at him. "And if I say no?" "I'll ask someone else, but I think you'll do it better than anyone." She glanced toward the dock, where Vic was rolling a new pallet jack into position, then back at Nolan. "I'll try it out, but I'm not sugarcoating anything. Wouldn't ask you to." By the end of the week, Store 5 wasn't fixed. But it was functional. Trucks rolled out with complete manifests. Deliveries arrived on time. New hires were trained with consistency. The loading bay stopped echoing with shouting and started humming with process. Nolan visited again the following Friday. He didn't announce it. He just showed up in plain clothes, walked the floor, and watched. Marcy was showing a new loader how to wrap freight for stability. Darnell was reviewing a route tablet with a trainee, pointing out detours without cutting time. Antonia was on the radio, calmly directing a reroute due to a flat tire. No panic, just solutions. Nolan stood near the door as the afternoon shift filtered in. Eddie, the veteran from the break room, walked past and gave him a silent nod. Not exaggerated, just real. Jenna joined him, holding a clipboard. "Payroll's clean," she said. "No more ghost write-ups, no time shave-offs. Attendance is up. So is morale." "Good. You want to replicate this program at other stores?" "Not yet," Nolan said. "Not until I know this one sticks. We don't fix culture with templates. We fix it by listening." He watched another truck roll out. The lift gate was secured. The load was balanced. The driver waved to the dock crew and eased out of the lot without a rush. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was the foundation worth building on. Nolan stayed until the last route departed. Then he stepped outside, took off his badge, and tucked it in his pocket not because he was hiding who he was, but because he didn't need to announce it anymore. The people inside knew he'd been there, and more importantly, they knew he'd come back.